anything about addressing the actual root causes of misogyny, where 2/3 of mass shootings are connected to domestic violence, or the emergence of white supremacy radicalization, mass incarceration, and poverty, and the connections between that and mass shootings in our communities. I yield my time. Thank you.
We had guns everywhere. There was virtually no regulation. Any child in the 50s could buy a weapon from any seller if daddy sent them with the money. We didn't have mass shootings. It wasn't until 1968 in America that serial numbers were even required on weapons sold in this country. You order weapons through the Sears catalog by the mail. In the 70s, I attended a high school, large rural school. Virtually every vehicle in the parking lot was a pickup truck, and almost every one had a rifle or a shotgun on the back glass and a pistol under the seat. And we didn't have school shootings.
This was not polite. This was not calm. This was Clay Higgins staring straight down AOC and basically saying, "You're wrong," and deep down, you know it. AOC fires off her usual iron pipeline rant, blaming red states for New York City's crime wave. Higgins fires back with straight history, straight culture, and one brutal question that left the room stunned. What the hell happened to our country? You could feel the tension. You could feel the clash. This wasn't a discussion. This was a collision, and Higgins just delivered the savage takedown of the year. If you're tired of watching the Second Amendment get treated like it's optional while Democrats push more restrictions that only disarm law-abiding Americans, smash that subscribe button right now. We are breaking down the moments the mainstream media prays you never see. Let's talk facts.
There was a lot of discussion about New York City. There is no discussion about gun violence in New York City without discussing the iron pipeline that is Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and honorary mention to Ohio, where 70% of likely illegal trafficked guns found in New York City come from. There's no discussion about gun violence in Chicago without talking about Indiana, because the violence and the mothers that we have to comfort are losing children due to the guns and the carnage and the lawlessness unleashed by those states. I move on. For context, the NRA spent about $250 million in 2020 alone. That's more than twice the entire salary of Congress combined in 1 year, lobbying against gun safety laws. There's also this discussion about anything but a gun, but that these are about violent people, but yet we aren't doing anything about addressing the actual root causes of misogyny, where 2/3 of mass shootings are connected to domestic violence, or the emergence of white supremacy radicalization, mass incarceration, and poverty, and the connections between that and mass shootings in our communities. I yield my time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm going to bring us back in time to World War II. America's population, 140 million. 15 million American men came home from World War II with deep scars and significant skills. They bore the invisible wounds of war. And there was weapons everywhere. We'll talk about mental challenge. My father was one of those men who was a Navy pilot in World War II. He came back from the war and built his family. I'm the 7th of his 8 children. I was born in 1961. We had guns everywhere. There was virtually no regulation. Any child in the 50s could buy a weapon from any seller if daddy sent them with the money. We didn't have mass shootings. It wasn't until 1968 in America that serial numbers were even required on weapons sold in this country. You order weapons through the Sears catalog by the mail. In the 70s, I attended a high school, large rural school. Virtually every vehicle in the parking lot was a pickup truck, and almost every one had a rifle or a shotgun on the back glass and a pistol under the seat. And we didn't have school shootings. 1979, I began college. One of the jobs I had to work my way through college was as a carpenter. We restored historical buildings. We had to determine in the process of that work what was the original cuts of these homes, residential homes built 75, 85, 100 years ago. You could tell by the saw cut if it was a mechanical cut, an electric cut, or a hand cut. By such observations, we knew exactly how that house was originally built. And to my amazement as a young man, beginning college in Louisiana, working, to my amazement, you know what I discovered, Madam Chair? You know what these houses did not have that were built 100 years ago in cities in America? You know what they did not have, Commissioner? Locks. Locks. Now I ask you all, what happened to that country, man? A country where homes were built in cities with no locks. A country where guns were everywhere and virtually not regulated at all. Where millions of Americans, 14 million Americans came back. It's 11% of the population at the time after World War II with incredible skills of war and weapons of war, as you called them, everywhere. But we didn't have mass shootings. And here we sit today where an entire once proud Democratic Party is presenting unbelievably unconstitutional laws to press upon our nation, and we have a police commissioner that says he would go home to home and confiscate legally owned weapons if he got a tip. Madam Chair, I yield my speech, but I will not yield my opposition to these unconstitutional.
What made this moment so powerful wasn't Clay Higgins yelling. He didn't. It's that he reframed the entire debate in seconds. AOC comes in hot with the iron pipeline argument. Guns flowing from red states with looser laws. That's why New York and Chicago drown in violence. But think about what that claim quietly admits. It admits criminals don't follow laws. It admits even the strictest local gun regulations can't stop weapons from reaching violent offenders. And somehow, the solution is always more laws. That's where Higgins pivoted and destroyed. Instead of getting dragged into a statistics shouting match, he went historical. He went cultural. He took us back to post-World War II America. 15 million battle-hardened men came home, trained in combat. Guns were everywhere. Regulation was basically non-existent. Serial numbers? Not required until 1968. You could order firearms through a catalog like it was Amazon. In the 70s, rifles sat in truck windows in school parking lots. And yet, we didn't have mass school shootings every month. Then he drops the story that hits like a gut punch, restoring 100-year-old homes, and discovering they didn't even have locks on the doors. Let that sink in. A country where doors weren't locked. A country full of firearms. A country filled with combat veterans. And not a country consumed by mass shootings. So Higgins asks the question Democrats desperately don't want to touch. What changed? Because if guns were present then, and violence wasn't at this scale, then maybe, just maybe, the root cause isn't the mechanical object. It's cultural. The left wants to talk about access. Higgins wants to talk about values, fatherlessness, community breakdown, media glorification of violence, loss of faith, the collapse of shared moral standards. Those are uncomfortable conversations. It's easier to pass another bill than rebuild a culture. And here's where the constitutional hammer drops. Higgins made it crystal clear. Proposals that involve confiscating legally owned firearms are expanding federal overreach cross a line. The Second Amendment isn't a suggestion, it's a boundary. There's an old saying, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. If you normalize government going door to door over anonymous tips, you're not talking about safety anymore. You're talking about power. And here's the irony in AOC's position. By screaming about the iron pipeline, she's admitting criminals bypass regulations. That's the entire point conservatives have been making for decades. Criminals don't line up at the DMV to follow compliance procedures. They operate outside the law. So tightening restrictions mainly affects who? Law-abiding citizens, single moms in rough neighborhoods who want protection, small business owners, veterans, rural families, people who actually follow the rules. Meanwhile, the gang member doesn't give a damn what the legislature passed last Tuesday. Higgins wasn't arguing violence isn't real. He was arguing the solution isn't to erode constitutional rights, while ignoring cultural decay. And that's what made the moment legendary. It wasn't flashy. It was foundational. It challenged the assumption that more bureaucracy equals more safety. Because if laws alone solve violence, the strictest cities in America would be the safest places on earth. But we all know that's not how it works. Safety comes from strong families, stable communities, moral accountability, and yes, citizens empowered to defend themselves. The deeper question Higgins raised is bigger than guns. It's about whether America is willing to admit something shifted in the 60s and 70s, culturally, institutionally, morally. Whether we're willing to rebuild instead of regulate. You can't legislate virtue. You can't confiscate your way back to trust. You can't fix a spiritual problem with a federal mandate. Clay Higgins didn't just shut down AOC's talking points. He forced a conversation about the soul of the country. And until we are willing to answer that question, what happened to our country, we're going to keep arguing in circles. If you believe the Constitution still matters, if you think culture is just as important as policy, and if you're not afraid of these real conversations, hit subscribe right now. Because this debate isn't ending anytime soon. And neither should the fight to preserve what made America strong in the first place. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did Higgins just deliver the epic own of the year, or is AOC still right? Be honest. Like if you're with us. Subscribe if you're ready for more no-holds-barred truth. Turn on notifications, we got more savage takedowns coming. This is how conservatives win. Stay locked in.